to record it, Brian Plain. It's live recording. You guys can talk. They can't hear you. I said it.
Are these economic reforms in the member states to lay the foundation for future economic growth, reforms to create the architecture of fiscal union to make monetary union more viable for the long run, and financial support by European governments and central banks in the form of a stronger firewall that will allow the financial system of Europe to provide the oxygen necessary for economic growth, and that will enable governments to borrow at sustainable interest rates. Financial crises, of course, are ultimately resolved when governments and central banks succeed in creating the conditions that make it compelling for investors to take the risks involved in lending to governments and to banks. That's, of course, the ultimate test of credibility. Now, I just want to say, although the eyes of the world are very much on Europe now, that as an American, I want to make it clear that we face very challenging economic challenges in the United States still. We have a lot of work ahead of us in laying the foundation for stronger long-term fiscal reforms, in creating conditions for stronger economic growth in the future, repairing and reforming our financial system. And we are working very hard, also facing complicated politics, to sort of try to make more progress against those basic objectives. It's nice to be here, and I look forward to my discussions later this week in Paris and with the new leaders of Italy and Spain. Thank you.
We have time for 2 questions.
Secretary Geithner, from your discussions this morning with Mr. Draghi and Mr. Wiedemann, and your discussions this afternoon with Mr. Schäuble, are you more optimistic that the European Central Bank will provide further support for Eurozone countries through an aggressive bond purchasing program? And for Mr. Schäuble, has Germany lessened its opposition to such a program? Thank you.
For reasons you can all understand, I'm not going to speak to what the ECB should do or will do or can do. The ECB has been playing a central role in this crisis. It's obviously going to continue to do that. And of course, ultimately, these things only get solved by governments and central banks doing what's necessary, but their roles are different.
You have seen that German Federal Chancellor and French President Sarkozy yesterday said, once again, not surprisingly, that both and everyone in Europe respects fully the total independence of the European Central Bank. Therefore, please, I do understand I will never make any comment and any remark to the policy of the European Central Bank.
Herr Stahl?
Haben Sie über Wege gesprochen, um die Kapazität des IMF zu erhöhen? Und ist die US-Notenbank Fed bereit, in einen entsprechenden Sondertopf zu zahlen?
Did you also talk about raising needs, how to enhance and increase IMF resources? And would the Federal Reserve be ready to pay money into a special fund?
Let me see if I can say this carefully. IMF's been playing a very important role in this crisis so far. We expect that to continue. Of course, the IMF exists in some ways for this purpose. It's to help its members meet their financial needs, provided they're willing to meet the IMF's conditions. And the IMF can play a very helpful role in terms of not just providing advice on the design of reform programs, but also to provide an independent, objective public assessment of the progress countries are making in meeting those basic commitments. So, of course, the IMF has a role to play in this, and we will continue to support a constructive role by the fund in the context of the efforts the Europeans are making to build a stronger Europe.
Ich will nur hinzufügen, wir sind sehr dankbar für die konstruktive Rolle, die der IMF seit Anfang vergangenen Jahres.
Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner trying to walk, obviously, a very fine line about what he can and should say. But bottom line, saying he's encouraged, in his words, by developments in Europe, saying three things need to happen: economic reform, fiscal union, financial support for government and banks. Says the politics are very complicated. Was asked whether the German opposition to certain policies is lessening. He would not go there, and said, in his words, he would not speak to what the ECB can or should do. Critical meetings this week for the Treasury Secretary and that meeting with the German Finance Minister. John Harwood's in Washington following this news for us, along with our capital markets editor Gary Kaminsky. And John, tough gig, a very tough gig to thread this needle this week over there.
Very tough gig, but his presence there reflects the importance of the resolution of this issue to the United States economy, to the global economy. You saw Tim Geithner also eating a little humble pie there, acknowledging that the United States has big work to do on fiscal reform, on long-term stability, acknowledging difficult politics in the United States, just as the politics are difficult in Europe. So in some way, he was telling his colleagues and telling the rest of the world, we get how difficult this is. It's difficult in our country, but we've got to keep pressing. We've got to get it done.
What do you make of this, the word encouraged? How far can we take that?
Well, I think everybody has been encouraged by the signals at the beginning of the week, the way that Merkel and Sarkozy have both embraced the idea of new sort of fiscal governance rules that potentially could unlock additional assistance for the countries that need it. ECB will play a role, and of course, in the end, it gets backstopped by the German taxpayers. And
okay, once again, this is a live recording of Geithner, and it's everything that stockmarketfunding.com has been saying, and we're going to be talking more about this moving forward and how it plays in your risk management profiles in 2012. Stay on standby and make sure you go to the SMF Economic Worldwide Crisis radio show, which we will be doing. I'm going to conclude it. There is the knee-jerk reaction. There is your S&P right below the 200-day simple moving average with a double buy signal. But you got to remember, from the low of where we called the 1150, that you had the news coming out of Europe to get it up here, and that's roughly 100 handles to the call side up here to this resistance area. I will conclude now that if you stay tuned and you understand that this markup from here to here will fail,